Welcome to the Know It's Some podcast, bringing you the widest variety of conversational interviews for a well-rounded perspective on life. Because while it's true, nobody likes a know-it-all, it's also good to know it's some. Here's your host, Steve Platt.
That's right. Welcome back to the Know It's Some podcast. I'm your host, Steve Platt. I'd like to start the show by thanking everyone who voted for us in the nomination round of voting for this year's People's Choice Podcast Awards. This upcoming Sunday, August 8th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, they will be announcing the slate of podcasts that made the cut for the final round of voting. I feel pretty good about it, folks, and I'll definitely keep you posted on that. I'd also like to thank Dustin Woolbright, Lamar Lovelace, and Ben Chase for their reviews on Podchaser. We have many great reviews on Apple, but since Podchaser reviews are relatively new, especially for us, we could definitely use some help getting off the ground there. Those reviews are open whether you are an Apple or Android user. It does not matter. Open to everybody, and they're especially appreciated. So thank you so much for taking the time to review us there and give us a 5-star ranking. Of course, we'd also love a ranking and review on Apple as well. And as you know, if you leave us a review, we eventually read your name on the show. That's kind of how it works at the moment. All right. This week's guest is a true force in the world of podcast and radio. Patti Katter is the host of Wake Up with Patti Katter. And as the wife of a combat injured veteran, she's also somebody who helps veterans and their families through a number of nonprofit organizations. Her podcast, though, brings you interviews with everyone from the producer of Extreme Makeover Home Edition to an adult film actress. She's interviewed military veterans. She's my second guest ever to have interviewed William Hung, which seems to be a thing now. She's also somebody who asks folks about the trials that they've overcome and turned into triumph. She's all about overcoming obstacles and succeeding in spite of them. It's a burst of motivation to listen to her show. As a podcaster, it was great to talk shop with her because she is incredible at what she does. Her show is one that would make an excellent addition to your listening rotation. Please welcome this week's guest, Patti Katter. Hi, Patti. How are you doing? Welcome to the Know It's Some podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such a privilege.
No, it's a pleasure really to have you on. There are not a lot of people in this corner of the world that have podcasts, and it's just such a coincidence that you happen to be in the same small corner of Florida that I'm in. And you have a wonderful podcast, Wake Up with Patti Katter. Can you tell me what got you interested in media and in podcasting and that kind of thing? Because you've been doing it a little longer than I have.
Yeah, so it really started out when I was just a little girl. I remember sitting next to my grandma's rocking chair, and I would pretend like I was writing. It was before I even knew how to write the alphabet. And so I always told her I just loved writing. And then by the time I was like in third grade, I wanted to be a reporter. And I kind of had forgotten about that until just recently, actually. But long story short, it began with writing. I started into journalism big time, kind of in 10th grade when I was a sophomore in high school. Mm-hmm. I wrote for the Flint Journal, and I found out that by my writing, I could change the dynamics of whatever situation I was in pretty much. That was my mind frame anyways back then. I had written about our school lunches and how horrible they were. The newspaper came out on a Sunday, and that Monday morning, my principal called me down to the office, and I was afraid I was going to get in trouble. But they told me that they were going to actually change the school lunches because of my article. So
when you say Flint, do you mean Flint, Michigan? Like yes. The Flint, Michigan that's been all over the news due to their water?
Yeah. And I'm not glowing.
Well, that might have factored into some of what they were cooking with in those lunches.
That's why I'm like this.
So you grew up in Michigan then?
I did. Yeah. I was only in Flint until around the third grade, and we moved to a country area, a rural area in Michigan called Bertrand. And it was a nice childhood as far as, friends and school and everything.
Got you.
Yeah.
So you wrote in high school, um,
Mhm.
and then when did you get interested in podcasting? Is this a more recent thing, the podcast and radio thing?
Well, if we fast forward from high school, all the way until, gosh, it was 2006. Um, During the time in between high school and 2006, I had gotten married, had kids. My husband, he had just gotten out of the Marines when I met him, and then he had a 10-year break in service.
Okay.
And then he joined the Army post 9/11. So 2006, um, when he was in the Army, I had started this little support group for military spouses. And it ended up growing because some of those spouses during that time frame, 2006 to 2007, when he was deployed to Iraq, some of them started moving out of the area and they wanted to still be connected to our support group.
Okay.
So I discovered something called online talk radio,
Huh.
and it was called, oh my goodness, Shoe Talk Radio. So that's where I began, just kind of a little show for military spouses.
Hmm.
And it kind of has snowballed since then. It went from being just military spouses to my husband ended up getting wounded in Iraq. And so then I needed to change the dynamics of the show. And by then it had grown from just like a few dozen members to hundreds and then thousands.
Wow.
And the show after he was wounded was basically telling our listeners a little bit about how they can connect with veterans in their community and how to bridge that gap. So that's where I started. Um, and I've just been podcasting ever since, and my show has just kept evolving and growing.
You've been kind of a pioneer in that then. I mean, really and truly,
Mm.
long before everybody got interested in podcasts and all these different podcast apps and platforms came out, you've been broadcasting via the internet, your story and the story of others. You mentioned your work with veterans. Is that something that has always kind of maintained a central focus for you? Because I know your husband, being a former Marine, well, once a Marine, always a Marine, but
Mhm.
and former Army, and then being an injured veteran, I'm imagining that that's something that's very personal to you. Is that a main focus of what you do?
Well, it was for a long, long, long time. But then a few years ago, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, um, I felt kind of stuck. Like,
Right.
I felt like I still wanted to serve veterans, but I felt like I was kind of put into this little box because I became known as a military veteran caregiver, which I am. I help take care of my husband's medical issues.
Hmm.
And I wanted people to realize that I was more than that, though, and
Yeah.
that even though you're dealing with things, you can still be more than just one thing in a box. So I kind of took a step out, and I still interview military veterans all the time. I actually dedicated the month of July this month to military veterans, and I try to help when I can. But my show's not just military veterans anymore because through this whole entire process, I've learned that our military veterans have these different struggles, but some of the struggles can be relatable to civilians as well, and vice versa.
Hmm.
So I had a guy on my show at the very beginning of Wake Up with Patti Katter, who he was paraplegic. He was injured in a car accident. He was never in the military. But his story was really incredible. He really wanted to do body weight training or weightlifting,
Okay.
and he didn't know how he could do that being a paraplegic. So he learned that there's an Olympics just for paraplegics, and he became an Olympian paraplegic bodybuilder. And so during that show, recording with the civilian, I also had some of the veterans who were listening who were like, wow, I never even knew about this. So it just is a universal show now where all sorts of trials are talked about and how we can overcome different trials with triumphs, no matter what our background is.
No, absolutely, and it is inspiring. I think that it's one of those shows that you listen to it and it really kickstarts your day and motivates you to do more. You've had a wide variety of guests on. I even saw you had an adult film actress on.
Mhm.
It has to be kind of an interesting thing to be able to have conversations with such a incredible variety of people, and to let them tell their stories. Where do you find the inspiration for your guests? Where are you pulling the ideas for your show from? And really, what's the goal behind Wake Up with Patti Katter?
Mhm. So I find my guests just by networking, really. I meet one inspirational person, and a lot of times they have 5 or 6 friends who they are like, "Hey, you need to have so and so on the show,"
Yeah.
because usually, birds of a feather flock together. That's actually
Hmm.
true. So, the adult actress has a kind of a funny backstory. Her husband is a retired Navy SEAL, and there was a big scandal about them. And um, after her adult film industry that she was in for so long, she started realizing that there was a lot of abuse and a lot of children being trafficked adult industry. And
Yeah.
so just through the other connections that I had, I was introduced to this Navy SEAL, and then he introduced me to his wife who wanted to make a difference because she realized, in her work, there were a lot of crazy things going on that needed to be talked about to inspire others to keep their kids out of that industry, basically.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I can't even imagine. I think that you're shining light on a bunch of different things for your listeners. Is there a like a driving goal or inspiration behind the show? Is there something that you hope people are taking specifically from listening to your show and adding it to their podcast rotation?
Yeah, actually, to be really completely blunt and transparent, I've had a lot of stuff happen in my life that's really crazy, and it can really get you down if you think about it too hard.
Mm,
And so the way that I've dealt with some of those things is just to keep focusing on positive stories and to keep focusing on helping other people. Like, not only did my husband, end up getting wounded in war, we lost a lot of friends in war. I helped with a lot of funerals. My dad ended up overdosing after my mom died of cancer, and that was in 2015. So there were a lot of struggles that I've had in my life, but the way I just kind of keep going is to realize I am not alone in these trials. Like, everybody has something in their life. If I flip the interview around right now and started interviewing you, I know I could come up with some questions that would kind of dig and see that your life's not all roses either. And if we talk about these things and how you've overcome these trials, it's going to help the listeners. And that's what I want to do.
well, absolutely. I mean, you can when you have things like that happen in your life, there's only really two ways to approach it, and one is to kind of throw your hands up and say, well, I've been dealt these terrible cards, and so therefore I cannot succeed, I cannot be happy, I cannot move forward. And the other one is to say, I can succeed, I can be happy, I can move forward despite these things happening, and cope with it and work with it. And it's a challenging thing, but I think that you're not just a survivor or someone who's overcome such difficult situations in their life and tragedies. You're a champion in a lot of ways. I mean, you talk about interviewing this Paralympic weightlifter, right? But your story is truly incredible. I mean, if you just look at the podcasting aspect, this is still an industry that is dominated by men, um, in a lot of ways. And here you are with a very very successful show, kind of showing other women like, look, we are able to do this as well, and do it better, honestly, in a lot of ways. um
Yeah.
you know
You know, Thankfully, my grandma was a huge part of my life, and she was one of the Rosie girls. She helped build bombs back in World War II, and she would wear pants when all the other women were wearing these dresses. And
Mm,
she would get things done. I mean, she had a large garden. She was canning, taking care of the house. She was just a very motivated go-getter. Her
Hmm.
sister died of tuberculosis when she was little, and my grandma ended up helping so many people in her life, and that was a huge influence for me. And then I remember my dad always telling me when I was growing up that it didn't matter if I'm a girl or not, I can do anything that I wanted to. And so that was very helpful as well. I never felt limited by being a female. I actually feel pretty empowered.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I mean, quite frankly, there's nothing limiting about it. And if anything, like you guys have, they talk about you've probably heard the term emotional intelligence or emotional IQ.
Mhm.
You guys have definitely a higher emotional IQ, just on average than we do, and it's because of these societal things where men are taught, like, look, boys don't cry, boys don't show emotion, you know what I mean, like that kind of thing. And then we end up bottling up a lot of things, I think, as guys, and not really openly talking about things, and not really dealing with things in a healthy way. And so when it comes to podcasting, what I've found is that the more open and the better conversations that I'm having are actually with my female guests.
Mhm.
Just by nature of the way that society's been, and that's starting to change now. And I think, going forward, there's less of that stigma being instilled in our children. But definitely, what you've done is really truly an incredible thing. Let me ask you a question. So in this age of social media, I know that you have accounts on Facebook and on Twitter and everywhere, and there are positive people that want to lift you up, want to recommend your show, love your show. But there are also a lot of trolls out there in social media world. People that
Mhm.
feel very confident because they're behind a keyboard and not in front of you in person. And I know with me, I've encountered a few here and there. um, have you had any encounters with that, or have you run into uh, sort of like the ugly side of social media yet?
Yeah, I did. And it wasn't very fun, but I did learn that there are reasons that social media has the block and delete button.
Yep, and the
And
mute button. They're all very
yes,
important.
yes, and I think people really should utilize them because when somebody writes something negative to you or even frightening, I remember some lady said that she wished that I would fall down a flight of stairs and die.
Oh, lovely. Yeah,
um, yeah, and I was like, "Who are you? What are you saying?" But instead of responding to that, because that's what those trolls want you to do, is
yeah.
I just block and delete it, and the majority of the time it will go away. There was one incident that I filed a police report in case it escalated.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. But thankfully it did not escalate. And thankfully, I haven't had any issues lately, but I truly believe it's because I don't even give them the time of day anymore. It used to really bother me, but with podcasting or whatever business that you're in, it's so important just to stay focused on your mission. So
Yeah.
I know somebody recently asked me, well, you don't have very many followers on Instagram. Like I have just over 1,500. And that's not my priority. Like my priority
Mhm.
is not my Instagram account. My priority is making sure that I'm pumping out great podcasts. And I think that that's showing that that's what I'm focused on and that's what I'm succeeding in.
Oh yeah. And I had a similar thing when it came to the social media thing, because I started up the podcast and I didn't have social media accounts for it. In fact, it was just a hobby for me. I wasn't really looking to necessarily grow it. It was just, let me have some interesting conversations. I started it during the pandemic. I had a young infant. My daughter even now is only 13 months old, and so for me it was like, okay, well, we're not getting out very much with a 4-month old or whatever, and people are social distancing, and events, concerts, that kind of stuff are not really happening. Let me start this as a way to have great conversations, and it kind of blew up. And then people are like, where are your social media accounts? And I had to start them from zero. And
Mhm.
so, there are not very many followers on social media, despite what the analytics are for the show being high, the all the 5-star reviews, and all that. There's not a lot on social media. And I've run into exactly what you just said, where some people are like, well, you're not doing this, and you're not posting TikTok videos, and quite frankly, that's not the goal here, right? The goal that you have and that I have is to put out quality content, and the rest will follow. And I'm seeing that.
Mhm.
Let me ask you. So you have these presences online. You just told me kind of how you've dealt with the trolls. Have you had listener feedback on the opposite side of the thing, where people have written in and told you, kind of how much they appreciate the podcast and how it's affected them in such a great way?
Yes, on a daily basis, and so that makes it all so much worth it. So I have thankfully, I haven't had a lot of experience with the trolls that happened a few years ago, um, but thankfully not a lot anymore.
Right.
So it's more rewarding for me that I don't pay attention to those kind of people, because then the ones that are writing meaningful, um, messages to me are so much more at the top of my list, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So I had one guy, he was an Army veteran, or he is an Army veteran, and he wrote and he said that one of my podcasts saved his life. I mean,
Mm.
that's huge.
Oh yeah.
And he has kids now he didn't have before, and he has a whole new outlook on life. And I had another guy, he went out and bought a brand new Roku TV just so he could watch my podcast. But I have had a lot of amazing people and amazing stories like that, and I'm so thankful for my listeners. I have a really tight group on Facebook who listen to my podcast, and who are so supportive. And if I don't post in that group once in a while, I'll get messages saying, "Are you okay?" So
Oh,
it's just great.
like a family almost. I mean,
It is. Mhm.
that's phenomenal. Now, you mentioned Roku. So your podcast is not just available on your major podcast platforms, but I noticed that you also are on Amazon, on Roku, and then also on the radio. How did that come about?
Well, it just all kind of lands in my lap. I don't even know how to explain it. Um, when you're on the right path, things just happen for you. I guess that's kind of how I describe this entire journey. Since I was little, I knew that I liked writing, and then I liked speaking what I wrote about. And I'm very, very passionate about everything that I do. And so I found that if you're not fighting the force, it's kind of like Star Wars, right? So if you
Right, right.
if you listen to the force, no. and and things just work out. It's just meant to be. So um the radio thing, I had a podcast guest on my show, and after the show we started talking about how his show was on the radio, and he's like, "Hey, let me introduce you to the person who made this all possible for me." And I talked to that person, and boom, I'm on the radio.
That's wonderful. And if people check out your show, folks, if you check out Wake Up with Patti Katter, what are they gonna find when they check out your show? Could you tell the listeners who have maybe not heard it yet, what your show will kind of bring to them?
Mhm. So we talk about all sorts of trials in life, a lot of personal trials, a lot of maybe mental health issues, physical challenges, but also financial and business challenges. So we have quite a diverse group of people who've been on my show who talk about their trials and how they've overcome those trials with triumphs. And each story, you can kind of take a bit of that, whatever their story is, and apply it to your life.
Yeah, I think the way for me that your podcast hits is it's like an adrenaline shot of motivation. I mean,
Mhm.
you're getting an injection of motivation, and it's all sorts of people that are facing, like you just said, trials and tribulations, and we all face them. You brought it up earlier. Everybody has a story, and when you hear all these people that have overcome so much, it kind of gives you the sense that, well, I can overcome what I'm facing. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I can do this, and it's that I can do this feeling that makes, for me, your podcast such a necessary part of my listening rotation. And I really thank you for everything that you're doing. Where can people find you on social media? Where can people find the podcast accounts?
Well, thank you for all of that, first of all. And then secondly, you can just find me on social media at Patti, Patti, Katter, Katter.
Awesome. And so if they search Patti Katter, they'll find you. You're available on all major listening platforms. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners today?
Today I'm recording a guided meditation to help people sleep, and it should be out in the next couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for
Phenomenal.
that as well. I partnered with a record label, and I'll be putting information on where you can listen.
That's awesome. Check it out on social media. This episode drops a couple weeks from now, so it should be out either by the time this drops or shortly thereafter. So go check her out on social media. Patti, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Know It Some podcast. My thanks again to this week's guest, Patti Katter. You are a motivation and inspiration to so many people through your show, and it was a real treat to have you spend some time here on ours. We really appreciate it. And folks, if you haven't done so already, please head on over to Apple or iTunes or Podchaser. Leave us a 5-star ranking, 5-star review. Would it be too much to ask you to do both? Apple, iTunes is one, Podchaser is the other. And Podchaser is available whether you are an Apple user, Android user, does not matter. And leaving us a review and a 5-star ranking there is the best way to support the show, and it helps us to continue to book interesting guests week after week. Another way to support the show would be to follow us on your favorite social media platform at Know It Some Pod. We are at Know It Some Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. We are there at Know It Some Pod, and you could always provide us feedback, send us a message by DMing us on one of those platforms or by emailing us. Our email address is knowitsomepod@gmail.com. Folks, I appreciate all the support. It's really been incredible. We have some great guests coming your way, and I'll see you next week.